To spend a few minutes and talk to you guys about some of the really cool features that are coming inside of STS 3.5, designed to support building bigger, better, badder Spring Boot applications. There's a lot of stuff, so I'll go ahead and just start building an application. File New, Spring Starter Project. Gives me a wizard, and this wizard lets me choose the different types of technology verticals I'd like to work with when building my application. Suppose I want to build a web application. I need only check web, right? If I wanted to work with JPA, for example, I could as well, or work with JMS or Batch or whatever. There's the usual pro forma sort of boilerplate. This is all metadata having to do with your project, the group ID, the Maven group ID, the Maven artifact ID, the description of the project itself, etc. I can hit next. If I hit next, I'm given the URI that I can visit to download the zip file that I want, or I can just hit finish, and then STS will go ahead and download the zip file, unzip it, and import it for us on our behalf. Once we're done with that, we'll have a blank, well, fairly blank, working application complete with an entry point for Spring Boot. Spring Boot, of course, is our convention over configuration, attention focusing framework for building Spring applications. First things first, I want to build some sort of system to manage reservations or bookings, you know, the sort of reservation you make at a restaurant or a hotel, something nonsensically trivial. So first things first, I'm going to build a Jpa entity, which is going to store my data in the database for me. It's going to model a record as stored in the database, rather. So class booking, like so. I want to use the Jpa entity annotation, but I don't have the entity annotation on my class path. Spring Tool Suite is super smart here. It knows that if I hit Control Space or Command Space, that I want the type that's transitively importable through the Spring Boot starter data JPA dependency to be brought in, right? So again, these starter dependencies correspond more or less to the checkboxes in that wizard that we looked at earlier. And so when I chose to import the @entity annotation and the type that contains it, Spring Tool Suite was smart enough to automatically add this dependency for me, as though I had chosen the checkbox up front in the wizard, you know. So if you want to start coding, you want to work, and you don't want to have to worry about dependencies, just go for it. Again, Spring Tool Suite will help you make up the difference later on. Okay, so now I've got a basic entity, a basic class. I'm going to give it a primary key, right? So @ID, like so. Command, you know, hitting Command Shift M there. @generated value, Control Space, and then I need a field for the reservation name, of course. And then from here, I'm going to use the quick access support, the really, really smart quick access support, to generate some stuff for me. So generate constructor, please. I don't want the ID in my constructor, but a regular one would be fine. I want to generate a constructor from superclass. That's fine, because you need a no argument constructor for JPA, of course, like so. And then I need a getters. Select getters. Okay, voila. And then just for good form, you need a toString, right? So I'll go ahead and generate that as well. And then with that, we have a basic JPA entity. Now we'll use Spring data to work with that JPA entity. So booking repository extends JPA repository, right? So it's going to be a JPA repository for entities of type booking with ID type long. And this repository, at a minimum, will support read, update, delete style work, but we can also add finder methods. For example, collection, booking, find by booking name, string, booking name. Okay. And we'll just hit Command Shift M to make sure we have all the types that we need on the class path. Again, never keeping our focus from the line of code that we're on right now. And with that, we have the pieces. Let's go ahead and put them through their paces, right? So I'll build a little component here that will be invoked when the application starts up, and it'll be given the command line arguments. So booking command line runner implements command line runner, like so. Of course, I need to import the type, right? So that does this. Command 3, override, implement methods, hit command line runner, choose run. Okay, and from here, we have everything we need to actually kind of work with it, except for one thing, a database and data in the database. Here too, Spring Boot can help. So we need either to explicitly configure a data source or to provide the requisite in-memory embedded database jars so that Spring Boot can automatically instantiate one for us. Here too, Spring Tool Suite Smarts can help us out. So go to the Maven Editor, and you can do this either in the Dependencies sub-tab down here, or you can just do it inline, right? Either one's fine. com.h2 database. I always forget the coordinates, right? So again, Spring Tool Suite can be invaluable here. I can choose, I've just chosen the group ID and the artifact ID. I can specify the version if I'd like. Of course, it's smart enough to know. I could even just specify the property, because it knows about the effective property defined by the Spring Boot parent POM, right? But again, since it's already defined by the parent POM, I no longer need to explicitly provide it here, unless I want to override it. What I have here is the POM that Spring Boot provides that has all the versions for all the different libraries you're likely going to use already described and tested and integrated together. So if you want to use JPA and Spring MVC and Spring Data and Spring Batch, Spring Integration, and all these other pieces, and you wonder which logging API, which version should I use, wonder no more. It's all already taken care of for you. Move to our application, move to our code, and it'll start up and it'll create a data source for us, but that doesn't solve the other problem of not having any data in our database. So let's go ahead and create a new folder. Okay, file, new folder, demo, source, main, resources, like so. And we'll put a new file in there called data.sql, which Spring Boot will pick up at the beginning of the run, and it'll automatically insert the DDL that it finds in a file called schema.sql, and it'll automatically insert the data that it finds inside of a file called data.sql for us. So insert into booking name, values, Chris, Martin, Andy, Josh. Alrighty. And with that in place, hit Command 3 again. So with that in place, let's hit Command 3, run Spring Boot application. That'll start it up over here. Go ahead and put that down there. And you'll see the application get started. You'll see the tables automatically created. And the data should be there as well. We can verify as much by simply injecting our booking repository here, like so, and then running through it. So for booking B, booking repository.find all. Command 3, run, oh well. And there you go, you can see the output data reflecting exactly the data that we put in there already. As a last step, let's go ahead and take this to the edge of the web. They say that any application of sufficient complexity eventually sends email. I posit that any application of sufficient complexity also exposes a REST API. So, REST, a booking REST controller that has one job. It is to return all the bookings in the database to the client, right? So we'll return this dot voila. Request mapping, bookings, and add the Spring 4 at rest controller annotation. And we're off. So we have now a Spring MVC REST API powered by, or working with data that's driven by a Spring Data repository. And then we have a Spring Boot command line runner that prints out as well on the application startup, and a Spring Boot entry point, as well as a Jpa Entity. So we'll stop this, Command 3, run it again. Yeah, data prints out on the client, on the command line just as before. But now if we go to the in STS browser, HTTP localhost :8080 bookings, hit go, and you can see the response coming back from the database. You can also see the query that's being issued on our behalf. So again, got a lot of stuff done very, very quickly. One might wonder just how we're doing all this. Like where are we setting up Spring MVC? Where's the Spring Data stuff being set up and all that? This is all being provided by Spring Boot. There's no magic here. This is just the sort of auto configuration that you can come to expect from Spring Boot. It itself is in turn using Spring's Java configuration, which means that if you want to figure out what Spring Boot is doing, you need look no further than the Spring Tools Live Beans Graph view. This will show you all the beans that have been configured in your Spring application, as well as the dependencies that they have. So here's the HTTP message converters auto configuration class that's provided by Spring Boot that in turn depends on this oddly named configuration properties. You'll see that in several different places, but for example, the dispatcher servlet auto configuration class has a subclass called dispatcher servlet configuration, which itself depends on server properties. Server properties is a configuration properties annotated class that is used by Spring Boot to load all properties having to do with the configuration of the server, the web server in this case, Tomcat or Jetty or whatever that's used in an embedded case. All these properties are expected to start with the string server dot. So server dot port, server dot address, server dot session timeout, etc. This can be very useful for finding ways to override or customize Spring Boot's behavior at runtime. This graph gives you all that access. There are different ways of looking at it. I like the graph view just as much as the tree view. They're both very handy in different situations. Here, this shows you the code page, or the class rather, and the bean that's defined in that class. So if you wanted to get the details, you want to see what's happening, you need only double click and you'll see what's happening. Again, the nice thing about this is you can see the relationships. You can see everything. You don't have to guess. I think that about covers it. I would remind people that on spring.io/guides, there's a bevy of tailored guides, task-focused guides that show you how to do a given thing in 10 to 15 minutes. To use them, you go to File, New, Import Spring Getting Started Content, and these guides you can follow them along inside of STS. They also mostly build on top of Boot, so if you wanted to follow a tutorial and learn how to work with Twitter, or learn how to work with Facebook, or RabbitMQ, or Redis, or any of the other things that you can do with Spring and Spring Boot, then go ahead, right? Just go to this dialog, choose one, choose the build type, right? Maven or Gradle are supported by default, and then choose which code set you want to use. So out of the box, for example, you'll get the initial working project, which is basically an empty skeletal directory structure, and then you'll get the complete project, which contains the finished project that you can follow along